James Walker's alarm clock pierced through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30, but he was already awake, staring at the ceiling of his cramped studio apartment in East London. Sleep had been elusive, chased away by a cocktail of hope and anxiety that had been brewing in his chest for days. Today was the day, the interview at Hargrave & Co., the prestigious financial firm that could change everything. After months of rejection letters, automated emails, and the soul-crushing silence that followed countless applications, this opportunity felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. James had found the job posting buried deep in a financial recruitment website, a senior analyst position that seemed almost too good to be true. The salary alone would triple his current income from the part-time tutoring work that barely kept him afloat. He rolled out of bed and walked to the small mirror hanging above his dresser, examining his reflection with critical eyes. The past 6 months of unemployment had taken their toll. His face was thinner, worry lines had etched themselves around his eyes, and his dark hair had grown longer than he preferred. But today he would look the part of a successful financial professional. The navy suit hanging on his closet door had been his father's, altered to fit James's slightly smaller frame. It was the same suit his father had worn to important meetings during his 20-year career at a mid-tier accounting firm before his sudden death 3 years ago. James ran his fingers along the lapels, drawing strength from the memory of his father's unwavering work ethic and moral compass. In the small kitchenette, James prepared his usual breakfast of instant coffee and toast, but his stomach was too knotted with nerves to manage more than a few sips and bites. He reviewed his notes one final time: company history, recent acquisitions, key personnel, market analysis. He had spent weeks preparing, memorizing every detail about Hargrave & Co.'s rise from a small London investment firm to an international financial powerhouse. The morning shower was quick and efficient, followed by careful grooming. James shaved twice to ensure smoothness, styled his hair with the last of his expensive pomade, and brushed his teeth until his gums ached. Every detail mattered today. He slipped into the pressed white shirt, knotted his best tie, a deep burgundy silk his sister had given him for Christmas, and pulled on the navy jacket. Standing before the mirror again, James practiced his handshake, his smile, his opening lines. "Good morning, I'm James Walker, and I'm delighted to be here today." He adjusted his posture, squared his shoulders, and tried to project the confidence he wished he felt. The folder containing his meticulously prepared documents sat on the small dining table. 3 copies of his updated resume, printed on expensive paper, letters of recommendation from former professors and his previous supervisor, copies of his university transcripts, and a portfolio of financial analyses he had completed during his master's program. Everything was organized with obsessive precision. As he walked to the underground station, James felt the weight of the opportunity pressing down on him like a physical force. This wasn't just about a job. It was about validation, about proving that his education and dreams hadn't been wasted, about finally being able to call his mother and share good news instead of awkward reassurances that everything would work out. The morning commute was a blur of familiar faces and routine chaos. James found himself swept along in the current of suited professionals, all moving with purpose toward their important days. He wondered how many of them had once stood where he was standing, desperate for their break, their chance to prove themselves worthy of a place in London's financial district. On the tube, cramped between a woman reading the Financial Times and a man scrolling through market data on his phone, James rehearsed answers to potential interview questions. "Why do you want to work at Hargrave & Co.? "Because I need this job more than I need to breathe." "What makes you the ideal candidate?" "Because I'll work harder than anyone else you'll interview today." As the train pulled into Bank Station, James's heart began to race. The moment he had been preparing for was finally here. He straightened his tie one last time, gripped his document folder tightly, and stepped out into the bustling financial district of London, where glass towers stretched toward the grey morning sky, and the promise of a new beginning waited somewhere in the maze of streets ahead. The streets of London's financial district buzzed with their usual morning energy as James navigated the familiar maze of glass and steel toward his destination. He had arrived early, wanting to familiarize himself with the exact location of Hargrave & Co.'s imposing headquarters, a modern tower that seemed to pierce the low-hanging clouds. With 15 minutes to spare, he allowed himself a moment to stand across the street and observe the building that might soon become his workplace. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of coffee from nearby cafes and the exhaust of countless black cabs weaving through traffic. James checked his watch again. 8:45 a.m. His interview was scheduled for 9:00 sharp, and he had learned from experience that arriving too early could be as detrimental as arriving late. He began his final approach, mentally rehearsing his opening remarks one more time. That's when he saw her. A woman in an elegant charcoal coat and expensive-looking heels stood beside a sleek black sedan, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically. Even from a distance, James could see her frustration as she stared down at the obviously flat tire on the rear passenger side. She had pulled her long auburn hair back into a professional chignon, but several strands had escaped during her apparent struggle with the situation. James's first instinct was to keep walking. He had an interview to attend, a future to secure, and stopping to help a stranger would mean arriving at Hargrave & Co. with dirty hands and wrinkled clothes. But as he drew closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was probably in her early 30s, poised and professional, but there was something vulnerable about the way she stood there, clearly out of her element with the mechanical problem. She had opened the trunk and was staring at the spare tire and jack as if they were artifacts from an ancient civilization. Her hands, James noticed, were manicured and soft, clearly not accustomed to manual labor. She pulled out her phone, likely calling for roadside assistance, but even from where he stood, James could see the frustration building in her posture as she apparently encountered busy signals or long wait times. The moral compass his father had instilled in him began to tug insistently. His mother had raised him to believe that character was revealed not in moments of convenience, but in moments of choice. Here was a person in need, and he had the skills to help. His father had insisted that James learn basic car maintenance, and changing a tire was something he could do in his sleep. James checked his watch again, 8:50 a.m. If he stopped to help, he would almost certainly be late for his interview. If he didn't stop, he would have to live with the knowledge that he had chosen personal advancement over human decency. The internal debate lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "Excuse me," he called out, crossing the street toward her. "Do you need help with that tire?" The woman looked up, and James was struck by her intelligent green eyes, though they were clouded with frustration and what looked like the beginning of tears. "Oh, thank God," she said, her refined accent carrying notes of relief. "I've been trying to reach my usual garage, but they're completely booked, and I have an incredibly important meeting in 20 minutes. "I can help you with that," James said, already shrugging off his suit jacket and hanging it carefully on the car's door handle. "I've changed more tires than I care to count." As he rolled up his sleeves, the woman watched with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "Are you sure? You're dressed for something important yourself." "It's fine," James said, though his heart was racing as he thought about his rapidly approaching interview time. He knelt beside the flat tire and began loosening the lug nuts. "What's your meeting about, if you don't mind me asking?" "Board meeting," she said simply, "the kind where people's livelihoods hang in the balance." James worked efficiently, his hands steady despite his internal panic about the time. The spare tire was properly inflated, and the jack was in good condition. As he worked, they made small talk about London traffic, the unpredictability of car trouble, and the kindness of strangers. She seemed genuinely interested in his answers, asking follow-up questions about his work and his life, with the kind of attention that suggested she was truly listening. 15 minutes later, James had successfully replaced the flat tire with the spare. His white shirt was streaked with grease, his hands were black with tire residue, and his carefully styled hair had fallen across his forehead. The woman handed him tissues from her purse and a bottle of water to clean his hands as much as possible. "I can't thank you enough," she said, reaching into her purse. "Please let me give you something for your trouble." "That's not necessary," James said, checking his watch one final time. 9:05 a.m. His interview had already started without him. "I'm just glad I could help." He grabbed his jacket and began jogging toward the Hargrave building, his heart sinking with each step. By the time he reached the reception desk, sweaty and disheveled, he already knew what he would hear. The interview slot had been filled by another candidate who had arrived on time and made a better first impression. As James walked away from the building, his dreams seemingly crushed once again, he wondered if he had made the right choice. But deep down, Beneath the disappointment and worry about his future, he felt something else, a quiet pride in having chosen humanity over ambition, even when it cost him dearly. Elizabeth Hargrave sat in her corner office on the 32nd floor of the building that bore her family's name, but her mind wasn't on the quarterly reports spread across her mahogany desk or the acquisition proposal that demanded her immediate attention. Instead, she found herself replaying the morning's unexpected encounter with the young man who had appeared like a guardian angel when she needed help most. The board meeting had gone exceptionally well, thanks entirely to his intervention. She had arrived with moments to spare, composed and confident, able to deliver her presentation on the company's expansion into European markets without the distraction of being late or flustered. The board had approved the proposal unanimously, a decision that would create hundreds of jobs and secure the company's position for the next decade. But Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of the stranger's face. Earnest, kind, with dark eyes that held no calculation or expectation of reward. In her 15 years climbing the corporate ladder, first at other firms and then taking over her family's company after her father's retirement, she had grown accustomed to interactions that were transactional in nature. Every conversation had an agenda, every gesture carried an expectation of reciprocity. This morning had been different. The young man had helped her simply because she needed help, expecting nothing in return. When she had tried to offer him money, he had refused with such genuine surprise that she realized he hadn't even considered the possibility of payment. In a world where everything had a price, his selflessness had been jarring and somehow deeply moving. Elizabeth had built her reputation on being able to read people, to understand their motivations, and leverage their desires to achieve business objectives. It was a skill that had served her well in negotiations and personnel decisions. But this morning, she had encountered someone whose motivations seemed entirely pure, and it had left her feeling oddly unsettled and strangely hopeful. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Margaret, could you come in here, please?" Her assistant, a sharp woman in her 50s who had been with the company since Elizabeth's father ran it, appeared in the doorway with her ever-present tablet and organizational skills that bordered on the supernatural. "I need you to help me with something a bit unusual," Elizabeth said, leaning back in her leather chair. "This morning, around 9 o'clock, I had car trouble on Threadneedle Street, near the bank station entrance. A young man stopped to help me change a tire. Early 30s, dark hair, well-dressed but not expensive clothes. He was on his way to something important, possibly an interview based on how he was dressed." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained professionally neutral. "You'd like me to find him?" "Is that possible?" Elizabeth asked, realizing how strange the request must sound. "He mentioned he was headed to an important meeting, and given the location and time of day, I'm wondering if he might have been coming here, to our building. I can check with security about anyone who had an interview scheduled this morning and didn't show up or arrived late," Margaret said, already making notes on her tablet. "We also have access to the street cameras through our security partnership with the City of London Corporation. If he was as well dressed as you describe, he might stand out in the footage." Elizabeth nodded, feeling both foolish and determined. "I know this sounds unusual, but I'd like to find him. He cost himself something important to help me, and I'd like to return the favor if possible." Margaret's expression softened slightly. In all her years working for the Hargrave family, she had rarely seen Elizabeth show such personal interest in someone outside their business circle. "I'll make some inquiries," she said. Discreetly, of course. 3 hours later, Margaret returned with a manila folder. "His name is James Walker," she said, placing the folder on Elizabeth's desk. "He had an interview scheduled with our Human Resources Department this morning for a senior analyst position. He arrived 12 minutes late, visibly disheveled, and the position was given to another candidate who had arrived early and made a strong impression." Elizabeth opened the folder and found herself looking at a professional headshot attached to a resume. It was definitely the same man. The kind eyes, the honest face, the subtle strength in his jawline. His credentials were impressive. A master's degree in finance from University College London, internships at respected firms, and glowing recommendations from professors and former supervisors. "According to his resume," Margaret continued, "he's been unemployed for 6 months since his previous company downsized their London office. He's been doing part-time tutoring work to make ends meet." Elizabeth felt a pang of guilt as she realized the full cost of his kindness. He hadn't just been late for any meeting, he had been late for a job interview at her company, an opportunity that could have changed his life. His decision to help her had directly cost him a chance at employment. "What do we know about the person who got the position?" Elizabeth asked. "Standard qualifications, good interview performance, but nothing exceptional." HR noted that Mr. Walker's credentials were actually stronger, but punctuality and presentation are heavily weighted in our initial assessments. Elizabeth closed the folder and looked out her office window at the bustling streets below. Somewhere out there, James Walker was probably wondering if he had made a terrible mistake in stopping to help a stranger. She had the power to prove that kindness was never a mistake, that sometimes the universe conspired to reward good people, even when the reward came in unexpected ways. "Margaret," she said finally, "I'd like you to find Mr. Walker's contact information. I think it's time I returned a favor." Elizabeth had expected to find James Walker at home, perhaps drowning his sorrows or furiously sending out more job applications. Instead, Margaret's investigation had led her to a small public library in Bermondsey, where he volunteered 3 afternoons a week, helping adults improve their literacy skills. She stood outside the Victorian brick building, watching through the tall windows as James patiently worked with an elderly man who was slowly sounding out words from a children's book. The scene struck her as perfect somehow. This man who had sacrificed his own opportunities was now freely giving his time to help others improve theirs. She had grown so accustomed to the calculating nature of her business world that witnessing such genuine altruism felt almost foreign. When the session ended, Elizabeth approached James as he gathered his materials. He looked up, and she watched recognition dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by confusion and embarrassment. "You," he said, standing up and instinctively running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name this morning." "Elizabeth," she said simply, extending her hand. "Elizabeth Hargrave, and I believe I owe you much more than just a proper introduction." She watched his expression change as her surname registered. Hargrave, the same company where he had missed his interview. His face flushed slightly, and she could see him piecing together the connection. "I was wondering," she continued before he could speak, "if you might have time for coffee. There's a lovely little place around the corner, and I'd very much like to continue our conversation from this morning." James hesitated, clearly uncertain about the propriety of having coffee with the CEO of a company that had just rejected him. "Ms. Hargrave, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I mean, given this morning's circumstances—" "Please," Elizabeth said, and she was surprised by the genuine plea in her own voice. "I think you'll find our conversation worth your time." The cafe was small and unpretentious, the kind of place Elizabeth rarely frequented, but somehow felt right for this particular conversation. They settled into a corner table, and Elizabeth ordered a simple cappuccino while James opted for black coffee, a choice that spoke to either financial constraints or personal preference, though she suspected the former. "I know about the interview," Elizabeth said without preamble. "I know that helping me this morning cost you a job opportunity at my company." James's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "I see. Well, that's unfortunate timing, I suppose." "You suppose?" Elizabeth couldn't hide her surprise at his measured response. "James, you missed a potentially life-changing opportunity because you stopped to help a stranger. Aren't you angry, frustrated? Don't you regret the choice you made?" James set down his cup and considered her question carefully. "Would you like the polite answer or the honest one?" "Honest, always." "The honest answer is that yes, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that I missed the opportunity, disappointed that I'm still unemployed, and disappointed that doing the right thing seemed to work against me." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "But I'm not angry, and I don't regret helping you. If I had walked past this morning, I would have gotten the interview, but I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." Elizabeth felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of integrity that was increasingly rare in her experience. "Tell me about yourself, James, not your resume. I've read that. Tell me about who you are." For the next hour, they talked with an ease that surprised them both. James spoke about his father's influence on his character, his struggles with unemployment, and his volunteer work at the library. He talked about his dreams of working in finance, not just for the money, but because he believed business could be a force for positive change when guided by the right principles. Elizabeth found herself sharing more than she had intended. Her frustrations with the sometimes ruthless nature of corporate leadership, her desire to prove that her family's company could be both profitable and ethical, and her growing sense that success without meaning was ultimately hollow. "I have a proposition for you," Elizabeth said as their conversation began to wind down. "We have an opening in our community outreach department, not the position you originally applied for, but something that might interest you. It's a temporary role, initially, helping us evaluate and improve our corporate social responsibility programs." James looked skeptical. "Ms. Hargrave, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Elizabeth said firmly. "This is me recognizing that my company needs people with your perspective and your values. You've demonstrated judgment, integrity, and the ability to make difficult choices under pressure. Those aren't skills you can teach. They're character traits that either exist or they don't." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, writing a name and extension on the back. "Think about it over the weekend. If you're interested, call this number on Monday and ask for Sarah Chen in Human Resources. She'll be expecting your call." As they parted ways outside the cafe, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of possibility that went beyond quarterly earnings and market share. She had found someone who chose principles over profit, and perhaps in some small way he might help her remember why she had gone into business in the first place. James walked away with her business card in his pocket, and a strange feeling that his morning's apparent disaster might have been the beginning of something entirely unexpected. Sometimes, he reflected, the universe worked in mysterious ways, and kindness had a way of creating opportunities that ambition alone never could. The Hargrave & Co. building looked different to James on Monday morning. Instead of representing a missed opportunity, it now stood as a second chance, though he remained uncertain about the true nature of that chance. He had spent the weekend researching corporate social responsibility programs, trying to understand exactly what his new role might entail, while simultaneously questioning Elizabeth's motives for offering him the position. The lobby was all polished marble and gleaming brass, with the kind of understated elegance that whispered, rather than shouted, about wealth and success. James approached the reception desk, straightening his tie, the same burgundy silk he had worn to his failed interview, now serving as a talisman of persistence rather than defeat. "James Walker, to see Sarah Chen in Human Resources," he said to the receptionist, a young woman whose professional smile seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "Certainly, Mr. Walker. Ms. Chen is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 15th floor and her office is the second door on the right." The elevator ride gave James a moment to observe his fellow passengers, a mix of sharp-suited professionals moving with the confident purpose that came from knowing exactly where they belonged in the world. He wondered if he would ever feel that sense of belonging, or if he would always be the outsider looking in. Sarah Chen turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with an efficient manner and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. Her office was organized with military precision, but personal touches, family photos, a small potted orchid, and what appeared to be children's artwork displayed on a bulletin board, suggested a life beyond corporate policies and procedures. "Mr. Walker," she said, rising to shake his hand, "Ms. Hargrave spoke very highly of you. Please, have a seat." The orientation process was thorough but not overwhelming. James learned that his role would involve evaluating the company's existing charitable partnerships, researching potential new community initiatives, and preparing reports on the social impact of various corporate programs. It was meaningful work, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the position had been created specifically for him. "One thing I should mention," Sarah said as they concluded the paperwork, "Ms. Hargrave has asked that you report directly to her office for your first assignment. It's unusual for someone at your level to have direct access to the CEO, but she was quite specific about wanting to brief you personally." An hour later, James found himself in the elevator again, this time headed to the 32nd floor and the executive offices. The elevator opened onto a different world, one of hushed conversations, expensive art, and the kind of thick carpeting that absorbed sound and created an atmosphere of serious purpose. Margaret, Elizabeth's assistant, greeted him with professional warmth and led him to a conference room adjacent to Elizabeth's office. Through the glass walls, He could see Elizabeth on a phone call, gesturing animatedly as she discussed what sounded like complex financial matters. She looked every inch the successful CEO, but when she caught sight of him through the glass, her expression softened, and she wrapped up her call quickly. "James," she said, entering the conference room with a folder under her arm. "Welcome to Hargrave & Co. I hope Sarah took good care of you this morning." "She did, thank you. Though I have to ask, how unusual is it for new employees to meet directly with the CEO?" Elizabeth smiled, and James noticed it was the first completely unguarded expression he had seen from her. "Quite unusual, actually. But then, most of our new employees don't come to us under such unique circumstances." She opened the folder and spread several documents across the conference table. "I want to show you something. These are reports from our current community programs, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, partnerships with local food banks, and a financial literacy program for seniors." James studied the documents with growing interest. The programs were well-intentioned but seemed somewhat scattered, lacking a coherent strategy or measurable impact metrics. "These look like good initiatives," he said carefully, "but they seem disconnected from each other and from your core business." "Exactly," Elizabeth said, and James was surprised by the satisfaction in her voice. "We're doing these things because they look good in our annual report and because other companies do similar programs, but we're not really making a difference, and we're not leveraging our actual expertise to create meaningful change." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her manner shifting from CEO to collaborator. "I want you to help me change that. I want Hargrave & Cohen's to become a model for how financial firms can contribute to their communities in ways that are both impactful and authentic to our business." For the next 2 hours, they discussed possibilities and challenges. James found himself energized by the conversation, his mind racing with ideas for programs that could use the company's financial expertise to address real community needs: small business mentoring, microfinance initiatives, financial planning services for nonprofits. "You have 60 days to prepare a comprehensive proposal," Elizabeth said as their meeting concluded. "I want you to research best practices, identify potential partners, and develop a strategic plan that we can present to the board." As James gathered the documents, Elizabeth stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. "I should mention that not everyone in the company will understand why I've given you this assignment, or why you have direct access to my office. There may be some resentment or skepticism." "I understand," James said. "I'll make sure my work speaks for itself." Elizabeth turned back to him, and in her expression, he saw something that looked like hope mixed with determination. "I believe it will. And James, thank you for taking this chance. I think we might accomplish something important together." As James left the building that afternoon, he realized that his morning of helping a stranger change a tire had led him not just to employment, but to purpose. He was no longer simply looking for a job to pay his bills. He was embarking on work that could make a genuine difference. Sometimes, he thought, the best opportunities came not from pursuing them directly, but from following your conscience and trusting that the path would reveal itself. 3 weeks into his tenure at Hargrave & Co., James had established a routine that felt both familiar and extraordinary. His days were spent researching innovative corporate social responsibility programs, interviewing community leaders, and developing frameworks for measuring social impact. But the most surprising aspect of his new role wasn't the work itself. It was the gradual evolution of his relationship with Elizabeth Hargrave. What had begun as formal meetings in the conference room had gradually shifted to more collaborative working sessions. Elizabeth would stop by his office, a small but well-appointed space on the 28th floor, to discuss his findings or bounce ideas off him. These conversations inevitably expanded beyond work, touching on philosophy, literature, and their shared observations about human nature. James had quickly learned that Elizabeth's public persona as the polished, sometimes ruthless CEO was only part of the story. In private, she was thoughtful, questioning, and surprisingly vulnerable about the challenges of leading a company while trying to maintain her personal values. She spoke about the loneliness of leadership, the difficulty of making decisions that affected hundreds of employees, and her constant struggle to balance profitability with purpose. "The board sees CSR as a marketing expense," Elizabeth said during one of their afternoon discussions. They tolerate it because it's expected, but they don't understand that it could actually be a competitive advantage if we approach it strategically. James looked up from his computer screen, where he had been drafting a proposal for a financial literacy program targeting small business owners in underserved communities. Have you considered framing it in terms of risk management rather than social good? How do you mean? Companies with strong community ties are more resilient during economic downturns. They have better employee retention, stronger customer loyalty, and more stable local partnerships. If we can demonstrate that our CSR programs actually strengthen our business fundamentals, the board might see them as investments rather than expenses. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. That's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? Because you've been thinking like a CEO instead of like a community member, James said, then immediately worried he had overstepped. No, you're absolutely right, Elizabeth interrupted. I've been so focused on running the company that I've forgotten what it feels like to be part of something larger than myself. It was during moments like these that James found himself noticing things beyond Elizabeth's business acumen. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking deeply. The genuine warmth in her laugh when he made an unexpectedly funny observation. The slight softening of her expression when she talked about wanting to make a meaningful difference in the world. He tried to convince himself that his growing awareness of her as a person rather than just his boss was simply the natural result of working closely together, but he couldn't ignore the flutter of anticipation he felt each morning, wondering if she would stop by his office or the way their conversations seemed to energize him in ways that went beyond professional enthusiasm. The breakthrough came during his 4th week, when James was preparing for a presentation to the senior management team about his preliminary findings. He had been working late, fine-tuning his PowerPoint slides and rehearsing his talking points, when Elizabeth appeared in his doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might need this, she said, setting 1 cup on his desk. How's the preparation going? I think I'm ready, James said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Though I'm a bit nervous about presenting to the executive team. I'm still the new guy who got his job under unusual circumstances. Elizabeth sat in the chair across from his desk, a gesture that had become comfortable for both of them over the past weeks. James, do you know why I really offered you this position? Because you felt guilty about my missing the interview. That was part of it, she admitted. But the larger reason is that you demonstrated something I rarely see in business, the ability to make decisions based on principles rather than immediate self-interest. That morning when you helped me, you chose to do the right thing even when it cost you something important. She leaned forward slightly, her green eyes serious. That's exactly the kind of thinking our CSR programs need. We don't need someone who sees community outreach as a checkbox to mark off. We need someone who genuinely believes that businesses have a responsibility to contribute to society. James felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition that their connection went beyond the professional realm. Elizabeth, he said, using her first name deliberately, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you take over your family's company? You could have done anything with your education and background. Why this? Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. Because I wanted to prove that you could be successful in business without sacrificing your soul, she said finally. My father built this company with integrity, but somewhere along the way the industry forgot that profit and purpose don't have to be mutually exclusive. And do you think you're succeeding? She looked up at him, and in her expression he saw both determination and uncertainty. I think I'm finally starting to, thanks in part to you. You've reminded me that the best business decisions are often the most human ones. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken recognition and possibility. They were no longer just CEO and employee, or even collaborators working toward a common goal. They were 2 people who had found in each other a rare combination of professional respect and personal connection. James's presentation the next day was a resounding success. His proposal for an integrated community investment strategy earned enthusiastic support from the senior management team and approval for a pilot program. But the triumph felt secondary to the quiet satisfaction of working alongside someone who shared his values and challenged him to think more deeply about the intersection of business and social responsibility. As the weeks continued, James found himself looking forward not just to the work, but to the daily interactions with Elizabeth that had become the highlight of his professional life. He was beginning to understand that sometimes the most meaningful opportunities came not from strategic planning, but from the unexpected connections forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. By his 6th week at Hargrave & Co., James had successfully launched the pilot program for community-focused financial literacy workshops. The initiative was already showing promising results. Local small business owners were reporting improved cash flow management, and community leaders were praising the company's authentic engagement with underserved neighborhoods. The success had not gone unnoticed by the board of directors, who had specifically requested that James present his quarterly report at their next meeting. Elizabeth called him into her office on a Friday afternoon, and James immediately sensed something different about her demeanor. She seemed simultaneously excited and nervous, a combination he had rarely observed in their months of working together. "James, I have some news," she began, gesturing for him to take his usual seat across from her desk. "The board was so impressed with your community investment program that they want to expand it company-wide. They're creating a new position, Vice President of Community Relations, and they want to offer it to you." James felt his breath catch. A vice presidency at Hargrave & Co. would represent a leap in both responsibility and compensation that he could hardly have imagined 6 months ago when he was struggling to find any employment at all. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say. The position would come with a significant salary increase, your own department, and a seat at the senior management table," Elizabeth continued. "You'd have the resources to implement programs across all our regional offices." James studied her expression, searching for the enthusiasm he would have expected her to feel about his promotion. Instead, he detected something that looked almost like reluctance. "You seem hesitant about this. Is there something I should know?" Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, arranging papers on her desk that didn't need arranging. "The board is offering you this position because they recognize your talent and the value you've brought to the company. It's well-deserved, and I think you should accept it." "But," James prompted, sensing there was more to her thoughts. "But I want to be transparent with you about something." She met his eyes directly. "There's been talk among some board members about our working relationship. Nothing inappropriate or unprofessional. We've always maintained proper boundaries. But the fact that you report directly to me, combined with the unusual circumstances of your hiring, has raised questions about whether there might be personal considerations influencing professional decisions." James felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I see. And do you think there's any truth to those concerns?" Elizabeth's pause was telling. "I think," she said carefully, "that we've developed a working relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. But I'd be lying if I said that was the extent of it." The admission hung in the air between them, acknowledging what they had both been feeling but neither had been willing to voice. James had been aware for weeks of the way their conversations seemed to energize him beyond professional enthusiasm, the way he found himself looking forward to their meetings with anticipation that had nothing to do with work agendas. "This promotion would solve that problem," Elizabeth continued. "As a vice president, you'd report to the board rather than directly to me. It would remove any appearance of impropriety and give you the independence you deserve." James leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. "And it would also eliminate most of our daily interaction." "Yes," Elizabeth said quietly. "It would." They sat in silence for several moments, both contemplating the crossroads they had reached. James understood the logic of accepting the promotion. It was a tremendous opportunity that would validate his professional capabilities and provide financial security beyond his previous dreams. But the thought of losing the daily collaboration and connection with Elizabeth felt like a significant loss. "Can I ask you something?" James said finally. "Of course. If there weren't any concerns about appearances or professional boundaries, what would you want me to do?" Elizabeth's expression softened, and for a moment, her carefully maintained professional composure slipped. "I'd want you to stay exactly where you are, working on projects that matter to both of us, challenging me to think differently about business and purpose." "And personally?" James asked, taking a risk with the question. "Personally," Elizabeth said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'd want to find out what might develop between us if we weren't constantly navigating the complexities of being boss and employee." James felt his heart racing. "Elizabeth, what if I turn down the promotion?" "You can't do that," she said immediately. "This is too important an opportunity to sacrifice for whatever this is between us." "But what if it's not a sacrifice?" James pressed. "What if staying in my current role, continuing to build something meaningful here, is exactly what I want to do?" Elizabeth shook her head. "James, you're thinking with your heart instead of your head. This promotion could set you up for life. You could have your own company someday, make real change on a larger scale. Or I could stay here and make real change alongside someone I respect and care about," James countered. "Elizabeth, 6 months ago, I was unemployed and wondering if I'd ever find meaningful work. Now I have a job I love, working with people I believe in on projects that actually matter. Why would I want to change that?" Elizabeth stood and walked to her window, looking out at the London skyline. "Because that's what ambitious people do. They take the next opportunity, climb the next rung, pursue the next challenge." James joined her at the window, standing close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. "What if I'm not motivated by traditional ambition? What if I'm more interested in finding purpose and connection than in accumulating titles and corner offices?" She turned to face him, and he could see the conflict in her green eyes. "James, I can't ask you to limit your career prospects for my sake. You're not asking, I'm choosing." He took a deep breath, knowing he was about to cross a line that would change everything between them. "Elizabeth, I care about you, not just as my boss or as a colleague, but as a person. I care about the work we're doing together, and I care about the possibility of what we might become if we had the chance to explore it." "The board would never accept—" "Then we'll find another way," James interrupted. "We'll be more careful about appearances. We'll make sure my work speaks for itself so loudly that no one can question my qualifications or your judgment. But I'm not going to walk away from something potentially extraordinary just because it's complicated." Elizabeth stared at him for a long moment, and James could see her wrestling with duty and desire, professional caution and personal hope. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She nodded slowly, and James saw something shift in her expression, a decision being made, a risk being accepted. "All right, but we do this properly. You'll need to prove yourself beyond any shadow of doubt. The work has to be exceptional, the results undeniable." "I understand. And we'll need to be discreetly professional in all public settings. No one can have any reason to question the legitimacy of our working relationship." "Of course." Elizabeth moved back to her desk and sat down, but her posture had changed. She seemed somehow lighter, as if a weight she had been carrying had been lifted. "There is one thing, though." "What's that?" "If we're going to navigate this situation, if we're going to explore whatever this connection between us might become, we should probably start by having a conversation outside of this office." She looked up at him with a slight smile. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere that has nothing to do with quarterly reports or community investment strategies?" James felt a smile spread across his face. "I thought you'd never ask." "Consider it my first executive decision in our new arrangement," Elizabeth said. "And James, thank you for choosing to stay. I think we're going to accomplish something remarkable together." As James left her office that afternoon, he realized that sometimes the most important career decisions had nothing to do with salary increases or job titles. Sometimes they were about choosing connection over convenience, purpose over prestige, and the possibility of something meaningful over the certainty of something safe. He had turned down a promotion, but he felt like he had gained something far more valuable: the chance to build a future with someone who shared his values and challenged him to be his best self. Saturday evening found James standing outside a small Italian restaurant in Covent Garden, adjusting his tie for the third time and wondering if he had chosen the right shirt. This was uncharted territory. Dinner with Elizabeth outside the familiar context of their professional relationship, where conference tables and quarterly reports had provided safe boundaries for their growing connection. The restaurant was Elizabeth's choice, a family-owned establishment tucked away from the main tourist areas, with warm lighting and the kind of authentic atmosphere that suggested she had discovered it through personal exploration rather than business entertaining. James spotted her immediately as he entered, seated at a corner table, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress that somehow made her look both more approachable and more beautiful than her usual business attire. "You look nervous," Elizabeth observed with an amused smile as James approached the table. Terrified would be more accurate, James admitted, taking his seat across from her. I've spent months learning how to work with Elizabeth Hargrave, CEO. I have no idea how to have dinner with Elizabeth Hargrave, the person. Well, for starters, Elizabeth the person prefers wine to quarterly earnings reports and has been known to laugh at completely inappropriate moments, she said, raising her glass in a mock toast. Also, she's just as nervous as you are, which is something CEO Elizabeth would never admit. The admission broke the ice, and James felt some of his tension dissipate. In that case, let me properly introduce myself. I'm James Walker, the person who talks to books when he's reading alone, and who once spent an entire weekend learning to make perfect pasta because he was determined to master something completely unrelated to finance. Did you succeed? I make excellent carbonara now, though I nearly gave myself food poisoning twice in the process. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease once they moved past the initial awkwardness. Without the structure of meetings and project deadlines, James discovered layers to Elizabeth's personality that had only been hinted at in their professional interactions. She told him about her university years, when she had briefly considered becoming a teacher before being drawn into the family business. She spoke about her love of hiking, her terrible habit of adopting stray cats, and her secret addiction to crime novels. I read them late at night when I can't sleep, she confessed over their main course. There's something comforting about problems that can be solved in 300 pages with clear evidence and logical deduction, as opposed to business problems, which seem to multiply exponentially and involve far too many variables controlled by other people's emotions and hidden agendas. Exactly. In a good mystery novel, the villain is revealed, justice is served, and you can close the book with a sense of completion. In business, you solve one problem only to discover 3 more that were hiding underneath it. James found himself studying her face as she spoke, noting the way her eyes lit up when she talked about things that genuinely interested her, how her formal posture relaxed when she wasn't consciously maintaining her executive presence. He was struck by how much more animated and natural she seemed, away from the office environment. "Can I ask you something personal?" James said, as they shared a dessert that neither of them had really wanted but had ordered to extend the evening. "After the conversation we had yesterday, I think we're well past the point of formal boundaries. Why haven't you married? I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but you're successful, intelligent, beautiful. I would have expected someone to have convinced you to settle down by now." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, twirling her spoon through the tiramisu. "Honest answer? Because most of the men I've dated were either intimidated by my success or primarily interested in it. I've never found someone who saw me as both a capable professional and a woman they genuinely wanted to be with. That seems like a failure of imagination on their part. Perhaps. Or perhaps I've been so focused on proving myself in business that I haven't made room for the kind of vulnerability that real relationships require." She looked up at him directly. "What about you? Surely someone as thoughtful and kind as you are hasn't remained single by choice." James felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I was engaged briefly about 2 years ago. She was everything that looked right on paper. Similar background, shared interests, compatible life goals. But when my father died and I went through a difficult period, she decided that my emotional complications weren't what she had signed up for. I'm sorry. That must have been painful." It was, but it also taught me something important about the difference between compatibility and connection. Sarah and I were compatible in all the ways that society suggests matter, but we didn't have the kind of deep understanding that makes 2 people want to face life's challenges together. Elizabeth reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture that was both comforting and electric. "Is that what you're looking for? That kind of deep understanding?" "I think it's what everyone is looking for, whether they admit it or not. The chance to be truly known by another person and accepted completely, flaws and all. That's a beautiful ideal, but it's also terrifying. Being truly known means being truly vulnerable." James turned his hand palm up, gently capturing her fingers before she could pull away. "It is terrifying, but I think the alternative, going through life, maintaining careful facades and keeping everyone at a safe distance, is even more frightening." They walked slowly back toward the underground station after dinner, neither quite ready for the evening to end. The October air was crisp, and London's evening energy swirled around them. Couples heading to theatres, friends spilling out of pubs, the eternal pulse of a city that never quite slept. "James," Elizabeth said, as they paused at the entrance to the station, "I want you to know that whatever develops between us, it won't affect my judgment about your work. You've earned your position through merit, and you'll continue to be evaluated on your professional contributions. I know that, and I want you to know that my feelings for you aren't influenced by your position or what you might be able to do for my career. I care about Elizabeth the person, not Elizabeth the CEO." She smiled, and in the glow of the street lamps, James thought she looked almost ethereal. "In that case, Elizabeth the person would very much like to see you again, outside of conference rooms and quarterly reports. Elizabeth the person is welcome to call James the person anytime she'd like. He's usually available for walks, conversations, and imperfect attempts at cooking." As they parted ways at the station, Elizabeth heading west toward her flat in Kensington, James east toward his modest apartment, both carried with them the sense that something significant had shifted. They were no longer just colleagues navigating a professional attraction. They were two people who had chosen to explore the possibility of something deeper, despite the complications and risks involved. The journey back to their respective homes gave each of them time to reflect on the evening and what it might mean for their future. They had crossed a threshold, moved from the safety of professional boundaries into the uncharted territory of personal connection. There would be challenges ahead, navigating office dynamics, managing public perceptions, and balancing their professional responsibilities with their growing personal attachment. But as James settled into his apartment that night, reviewing the evening's conversations, and the way Elizabeth's laugh had made him feel more alive than he had in months, he knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes the most important decisions weren't about advancing careers or securing positions. They were about choosing connection over convenience and taking the risk of opening your heart to someone who might actually understand it. 18 months later, James stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office on the 30th floor of Hargrave & Co., watching the familiar bustle of London's financial district far below. The title on his door now read, Director of Social Impact, a position that hadn't existed when he first walked into this building as a desperate job candidate. His department had grown to include 12 staff members, and their community investment programs had become a model that other financial firms were eager to emulate. The transformation had been remarkable, both professionally and personally. The pilot program he had developed during his first months at the company had evolved into a comprehensive social impact strategy that generated measurable returns for both the communities they served and Hargrave & Co's bottom line. Local small businesses that participated in their financial literacy workshops showed a 30% improvement in revenue sustainability. The microfinance initiative had helped launch over 200 community enterprises. Most importantly, employee satisfaction surveys consistently showed that staff members felt proud to work for a company that prioritized social responsibility alongside profitability. James's success hadn't gone unnoticed in the broader business community. He had been invited to speak at conferences, contribute to industry publications, and serve on the advisory board of a non-profit organization focused on corporate social responsibility. The young man who had once worried about paying rent was now recognized as a thought leader in sustainable business practices, but the professional achievements, satisfying as they were, paled in comparison to the personal transformation that had occurred alongside them. His relationship with Elizabeth had developed with the careful deliberation of two people who understood the stakes involved. They had maintained scrupulous professionalism in public settings, ensuring that James's continued success could never be attributed to anything other than his competence and dedication. Their colleagues had gradually become aware that something existed between them, but the evidence of James's professional capabilities was so overwhelming that even the most cynical observers couldn't suggest his achievements were unearned. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had grown into her role as CEO with a confidence and authenticity that impressed both the board of directors and the company's shareholders. Under her leadership, Hargrave & Co had expanded into new markets while maintaining the ethical standards that had become their distinguishing characteristic. The careful balance they maintained between professional excellence and personal connection had created something neither of them had expected, a partnership that enhanced both their individual capabilities and their shared impact. They challenged each other intellectually, supported each other through difficult decisions, and celebrated each other's successes with genuine joy. This evening marked a particular milestone, the company's annual gala, a black tie event that brought together clients, community partners, and staff members to celebrate the year's achievements. It was also, though few people knew it, the anniversary of the morning James had stopped to help a stranger change her tire. Elizabeth appeared in his office doorway, elegant in a midnight blue gown that made her green eyes even more striking. "Are you ready for tonight?" "I think so," James said, adjusting his bow tie one final time. "Though I still can't quite believe that the Community Investment Program is winning the industry's Social Impact Award." "You can believe it because you've earned it through exceptional work and genuine dedication," Elizabeth said, stepping into his office and closing the door behind her. "James, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished, not just tonight, but over these past months. You've exceeded every expectation." "We've accomplished," James corrected. "None of this would have been possible without your support and the company's commitment to actually implementing these programs." Elizabeth moved to stand beside him at the window, and for a moment they looked out at the city together, two people who had found in each other both professional inspiration and personal connection. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Elizabeth asked. "When you stopped to help me with the tire?" "Every day," James admitted. "Not because I regret missing the original interview, but because I'm amazed by how a single decision can change the entire trajectory of a life. I think about it too, about how close I came to missing the chance to know you, to work with you, to—" She paused, and James could see her carefully choosing her words. "To fall in love with you." It was the first time either of them had used that word explicitly, though the feeling had been evident in their interactions for months. James turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Elizabeth, I love you too. I love your intelligence, your integrity, your determination to prove that business can be a force for good in the world. I love working alongside you, and I love the life we're building together. Even though it's complicated, even though we have to be careful about public perceptions and professional boundaries." "Especially because it's complicated," James said with a smile. "The best things in life are rarely simple. They require patience, dedication, and the willingness to navigate challenges together." Elizabeth leaned forward and kissed him softly, a gesture that carried 18 months of carefully controlled affection and the promise of a future they were still defining together. "We should go," she said eventually. "Your public awaits, Director Walker." The gala was a triumph in every sense. James's acceptance speech for the Social Impact Award was met with a standing ovation, and several industry leaders approached him afterward to discuss potential collaborations. Elizabeth's keynote address about the intersection of profitability and purpose was quoted in 3 major financial publications the following week. But for James, the most meaningful moment came near the end of the evening, when he and Elizabeth found themselves standing together at the edge of the dance floor, watching their colleagues and community partners celebrating the year's achievements. "Look at what we've built," Elizabeth said quietly. "Look at the connections we've created, the lives we've impacted, the proof that businesses can succeed while making the world better." James followed her gaze around the room, taking in the diverse group of people who had become part of their extended professional family. Small business owners who had grown their enterprises through the microfinance program, students who had received scholarships, community leaders who had partnered with them on various initiatives. "It all started with a flat tire," he mused. "It started with your choice to help a stranger when you had every reason to keep walking," Elizabeth corrected. "That's what I fell in love with first, you know. Not your professional capabilities or your innovative ideas, but your fundamental decency, your instinct to choose kindness over convenience." As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave together, James reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 18 months ago, he had been unemployed, desperate, and convinced that his life was moving in the wrong direction. A single act of kindness, stopping to help someone in need, had led to opportunities he couldn't have imagined and a relationship that had transformed both his professional and personal life. The lesson wasn't lost on him. In a world that often seemed to reward ruthless ambition and calculated self-interest, he had discovered that authenticity, integrity, and genuine care for others could be the most powerful tools for both personal fulfillment and professional success. As they walked out of the building together, Elizabeth slipped her hand into his, a small gesture that would have been impossible in their early months together, but now felt natural and right. They had learned to navigate the complexities of their situation with grace and wisdom, creating something that honored both their professional responsibilities and their personal connection. "What are you thinking about?" Elizabeth asked as they waited for their car. "I'm thinking about second chances," James said, "about how sometimes what looks like a disaster, missing an interview, losing an opportunity, can actually be the beginning of something much better than what you originally planned." "And I'm thinking about kindness," Elizabeth replied, "about how a simple act of decency can create ripples that extend far beyond anything you could anticipate. You helped a stranger change a tire, and somehow that led to all of this. Our work, our programs, our relationship, the impact we're having on our community." As their car pulled away from Hargrave & Co.'s and into the London night, both James and Elizabeth carried with them a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation. They had built something meaningful together, not just romantic partnership, but a professional collaboration that was making a genuine difference in the world. The future remained unwritten, full of possibilities and challenges they would face together. There would be new programs to develop, new communities to serve, new ways to demonstrate that business success and social responsibility were not only compatible but mutually reinforcing. But tonight, as they headed home to the life they were building together, they were content to celebrate how far they had come, and to marvel at the mysterious ways that kindness, once offered freely, had a tendency to multiply and return in forms more beautiful than anything they could have planned or predicted. Sometimes, James reflected as London's lights flickered past their window, the most important career moves weren't about climbing ladders or pursuing opportunities. Sometimes they were about stopping to help a stranger, choosing compassion over convenience, and trusting that the universe had a way of rewarding those who led with their hearts rather than their ambitions. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, kindness led not just to professional success, but to love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that your work in the world was making it a better place for everyone. What an incredible journey from a simple act of kindness to a life-changing love story. James's decision to help a stranger with a flat tire, even when it meant missing his crucial job interview, proves that sometimes the universe rewards those who choose compassion over personal gain. This beautiful tale reminds us that authentic connections and genuine integrity can open doors we never imagined possible. The way Elizabeth and James built both professional success and personal happiness while staying true to their values is truly inspiring. It shows that in a world often driven by ruthless ambition, kindness and authenticity can be the most powerful tools for creating meaningful change. If this story touched your heart and made you believe in the power of unexpected connections, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Stories like these deserve to be spread far and wide because they remind us that one small act of kindness can transform not just our own lives, but the lives of others in ways we could never predict. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales that celebrate the beautiful complexity of human connections and the magic that happens when we choose love over fear. We'd love to know, what country are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world this story has reached.
You